we shared what we remembered. We said goodbye, and the following day, our friend Betty, they called back, and her husband Jeremy said, Rob, I know this will sound crazy, but Betty has something to share with you. She knows how Kelly got out of that plane.
Hey friends, welcome to Stories Told Through You, the Flower Letters podcast.
We're Michael and Hanny Clark, and each week we sit down with our amazing community and special guests to share the real, heartfelt stories that connect us.
Grab a cozy seat,
And let's dive into the stories told through you.
I'm so excited to share this episode with you. This conversation was so inspiring. If you don't believe in angels, you will by the end of this conversation. We talked to Robb and Kelly Hatch and Debbie and Clay Wood, who have an incredible story of survival, but also faith. We do want to warn you, there are some descriptions of an accident that will be detailed, and so if you are sensitive to descriptions of accidents or injuries, we just want to let you know in advance that is part of this episode. But we really hope you enjoy the conversation. Robb, Kelly, Debbie, Clay, thank you guys so much for joining us on our podcast today. We're excited to get to know you. Thank you guys so much for joining us and sharing your story. Before we jump in, maybe just introduce yourselves, then we could just kind of go from there. Does that work?
My name's Robb Hatch. I'm from Snowflake, Arizona. In the car industry, I run a dealership called Arizona Motors, which I've done my whole life. I'm third generation in the auto industry. I've got a beautiful bride, and I've got 2 kids, and they're both married, and really excited to be here today.
Thank you.
So Rob and I met in high school. We're high school sweethearts coming up on our 30th anniversary, and just amazed at how fast time goes and all the change that comes with life. And so we both grew up in the same community, obviously, and it's been a lot of fun.
Awesome.
Well, Clay and I are also high school sweethearts. We also grew up in Snowflake. We've been married 43 years, and we've got 4 kids and 14 grandkids. And Clay, our career has been really fire EMS. I did that for about 16 years, and then I bridged over into nursing and did ER nursing, and currently the district nurse at the Snowflake School District.
I'm Clay Wood. Obviously, she's my better half. I've been involved in the fire service for 33 years. I'm currently an assistant chief with Timber Mesa Fire and Medical District in Sholo. And at the time of the accident that we're going to talk about, it was Sholo Fire. Anyway, we are really glad to be here, and we're glad to share this story, and hopefully there's some inspiration to come out of this.
Thank you. And did you know each other before?
We did. We, being from the same small community, through church and community recreation ball, we all played softball and things. We've known each other for years and years. Clay and Robb were in the same ward when Robb was a little kid, and then his family did you visit his family?
Yeah. We did business with his mom and dad, and we've all known each other. We weren't really good friends back then, but we all knew the families, and we were all knew each other and talked on occasion and played competitive sports together. And kind of crazy how this happened.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So if we can maybe go back in time, if we could, 2012, is that right? And what's the exact date?
February 4th, 2012.
So February 4th, 2012, if you wouldn't mind, maybe take us through the that day. I don't know who's best to kind of go through that, Robb or Kelly, kind of starting with you. You wake up that morning, did you ever imagine anything like this happening?
Kelly can start it, and then Debbie can tell a little bit more, and Clay can do a little bit more, and then I'll come back.
That works for me.
So I usually start with our story when we share it with other groups, because even to this day, Robb doesn't even remember leaving our home that day. So Robb's dad was a very experienced pilot. He had the Cessna on like 210 turbo. And earlier in the week, his mom had called and said, hey, what do you think about going to Las Vegas with the boys to the National Auto Dealer Convention? She said, let's join and we'll go have a little getaway and spend time together as family. And so we made arrangements for our kids. And so I remember just getting up that morning. For some reason, it stands out to me that I looked up at the temperature gauge and it was 18 degrees. In February, you're at this tail end of winter. It's still very cold, still very dark at that time of the day. It was 5:30. And so it was cold and dark. And I remember just looking at the stars in the sky as we drove to Show Low. As we got there, we said our hello, and his dad was busy doing his walk around in preparations for the flight. I had never flown with his dad. It had always been business trips or boys gone hunting or him and mom going away. And so I felt privileged. I was super excited to finally get to fly with dad. And, we climbed in, got loaded. In a small plane, you kind of balance your weight. So I'm sitting behind his dad, and Robb was behind his mom. And I remember for some reason him tugging on my seatbelt, and I felt like a little girl. He had tucked into my car seat and, giving me a thumbs up, and away we went. We took off and taxied out towards the runway, and for some reason he stopped the plane. And I remember him jumping out and just running around the plane one more time, like he just wasn't sure or felt like there was just an off feeling, but he felt satisfied. Everything mechanically was working. Instruments seemed to be in check. So we jumped back in and we took off. Shortly after we took off, I remember just watching the city, the lights dim and fly farther away from the city limits of Show Low, and just being amazed at how dark it was, and not knowing, that eerie feeling of not knowing how high you are or where you're at. And it wasn't long after I remember the airplane just banked really hard to the right. And I grabbed for Robb. He was sitting right here to my right, grabbed his hand, and I remember him just patting my hand, telling me, we're okay, it's all right. And not flying in a small plane before, movement is you feel it more, it's more dramatic. So I kind of relaxed for a second, and then things changed drastically. I remember Robb starting to scream for his dad and just kind of like reaching across, like, Dad, Dad, and trying to reach his dad. And I don't know if his dad, we don't know to this day, did dad pass out? Was he having trouble with the plane? And Robb could see that he was in trouble. I don't know exactly why he was screaming for his dad. The next thing I knew, I looked up and I could just see stars once again. And it seemed like I was in a black and white movie with no sound. It was just this eerie place, and I thought for some reason that I'd fallen asleep, like I was in this weird dream. And I took in a deep breath of air, and just smoke filled my lungs, and that cold air, and it kind of jolted me to alertness. And I realized that our plane had crashed, that we were in trouble. And as I kind of took in the surroundings, I realized below me, under my seat, there's just flames coming up under my seat. So I remember just pulling my legs up and slapping at the flames. And Robb, our seats, which were once side by side, are now ripped apart. And he's kind of tilted over and he's screaming, seatbelt, push your seatbelt. And I'm pushing the button and it won't release. And I'm just continuing to slap at flames. My pant leg is caught on fire, and I'm slapping at the flames. And he cannot either get his seatbelt off or to release either. And so just panic, just sheer fear, chaos. And that there's no escape, and you realize you're faced with your final moments. We have a great faith in God, and so that's all you have left in a moment like that. So I just began to pray, to scream and to pray to our Father in heaven to help us. And as I'm having those thoughts of my children and thinking, do they know how much we love them? And does that hug and kiss we gave them last night going to be enough to last for the rest of their life? I'm praying and having these thoughts. Your life is truly flashes before your eyes. You're hoping that you've done enough good, that you're ready to go home. This is all just milliseconds, obviously, as you're in these moments. And about this time was our first Tender Mercy, our first miracle. I remember as I'm pulling on that nylon seatbelt, someone grabbed my arms and just held my arms, and I heard a voice that said, "Be calm. I am here. I will get you out." And the next thing I knew, I woke up about 40 feet away from the airplane. And as I looked around, I didn't know what my injuries were, if I had injuries. I remember just trying to sit up, and I couldn't sit up. I couldn't move. I just kind of rolled over to my side, and I could see the fire, just this huge ball of fire. And I could hear Robb still screaming, and I was looking for my rescuer, and I see nobody. There's nobody there. There's this heavy frost across the ground, and I don't see footprints. So I just continue to scream, "Please, somebody help us. Does anyone know where we're at?" And just continuing to pray. And the next thing that I saw, I started to see lights flashing off these cedar trees around me in the field. And so now I will turn some time over to Clay and Debbie.
So so you remember takeoff, Kelly, and then from takeoff to then your fire at your feet. What do you remember that time? What was that? Was that minutes, seconds?
I would say with probably 10 to 15 minutes, probably. I'm guessing, because I don't think we were in the air that long. I don't think it was. I'm sure with injury and shock and head injuries and all of that, trying to remember it all, it seems like it was a pretty short amount of time. So probably takeoff and.
Well, that's a question that we can find out. I'm glad you asked it, because we're writing a book to put all this together, because there's a lot more than just this podcast that we are going to need to tell the full story. And they'll have it in the tower, how long it was before, right, from the time that we took off to the time that we crashed, because we crashed about half a mile north of the runway in Sholo.
Okay.
So 6:38 a.m.
Yeah.
They're assuming whatever trouble was happening, that we were trying to get back to the airport. Like his dad was trying to get us landed again. It wasn't just. And I think because I remember that right bank, however far away we'd gotten, that's probably when we were turning to try and get back to the runway, to the airport.
And Robb, you don't remember any of this from takeoff to.
I think, I know we both had severe concussions. They told us we were both had brain trauma.
Yeah.
When you come down that hard, and we both broke our necks and suffered a bunch of other injuries, which we'll get into a little bit later. But I don't.
So Kelly, you're sitting there. Obviously, I mean, I can't imagine the harrow. I mean, you're just the fear and the begging for help, but you feel arms come around you, and I'm sure there's more to the story, but you feel something, and the next thing you know, you're pulled from safety. But at this point, is Robb still in the plane?
He is.
And so maybe that's where Clay, you and Debbie come in.
It is. So really, mine and Clay's part in Robb and Kelly's story is really quite simple. And that's the fact that God knows who you are. And he knows you as individuals. And sometimes he ends up using you. Sometimes you're his hands when he needs help. And we just feel we were just a couple of those hands in being part of their tender mercy, their angels that day. I'll go back to that night I worked in the emergency room. I was a paramedic tech at that time. And my first tender mercy started as that morning at 6 a.m. when our shift changed. I had a coworker that came up to me, and he just said, "Hey, Deb, I left my badge in my truck. If you give me your car keys, I'll start your car for you." So I handed him my keys, and he went out and got his badge, came back in, we did shift change, and I walked out of the doors a few minutes later. And as I walked out the door, I heard a voice that said, "Stop and see Clay." And I instantly pushed it back because I'm like, it's 6 a.m. I'm not stopping. Clay was at work at his fire station there that night. And I parked about 75 yards away from the emergency room doors. And so as I'm walking the distance of 75 yards, 3 times that voice came to me and said, stop and see Clay. And 3 times I pushed it back because being in the EMS world, I was at that point, I was involved for 11 years. Clay had been over 20 years. And we had 4 small kids, and we developed a routine of how to survive because we worked 48, 72-hour shifts. And so our habit was to contact each other after our 8 to 8:30, between 8 and 8:30 in the morning after shift change for both of us. And then we could just touch base and say, hey, the kids are here. This is what needs to be done today. And, survival for working parents.
Right.
And so walking towards my car and hearing that voice, I pushed it back because that was not our routine. I just like, no, this isn't what we do. But I remember distinctly getting into my car and, looking at my car. My car was all nice and warmed and thawed out. I had my coworkers scraping ice off their windows and felt guilty for like a second. And then I was like, no, I was talking to my nice warm car. Anyways, I jumped in my car and they pulled off onto Show Low Lake Road. Again, the voice said, stop and see Clay. And again, I pushed it back. And I was quite frustrated by then because I didn't understand why I needed to stop and see Clay. As Clay's station was on Fawn Brook Drive, which is just less than a mile from the hospital. And as I traveled that distance to Fawn Brook Drive, again, the voice just kept repeating over and over, stop and see Clay. And I kept pushing it back. And as I got close to Fawn Brook Drive, it changed from stop and see Clay to stop and see Clay. And I guess I can say I finally heard it. I finally listened. And without another thought, I turned left onto Fawn Brook Drive, realized I was committed to stop and seeing Clay. I picked up my phone. It's one of those old flip phones they're actually pretty cool. I miss my flip phone. And I dialed Clay and just said, hey, babe, I'm headed your way, gonna, come in to say good morning. And he met me at the door of the fire station and we visited for just a couple of minutes and off we went. And traveling home from Show Low to Snowflake is, we take a left on Highway 77. And as I was at the stoplight at Highway 77, I had a perfect view of the airport and I could see an airplane coming in to land. And my thought went to the flight crew. We had actually sent a patient to Phoenix that night from the ER. And just for some reason, I thought of the flight crew and thought, hey, they had a safe flight, glad they're home. And I turned left onto Highway 77, headed home. And as I was approaching the airport, so the end of the runway butts up to Highway 77. It's about 20 yards off of the road. It's very high, at the end of the runway. And as I was approaching the angle that I was at, I realized that the plane was coming in extremely fast. And I'm like, they're coming in fast. They're coming in too fast. I think they're going to overshoot. And then it went from, I think they're going to overshoot to, they're going to hit me. And I slammed on my brakes, tucked my head into the steering wheel, and waited for the impact. And a couple of seconds went by, no impact. I peeked up over my steering wheel, looked forward, and it was just as dark and black as could be. And I sat up a little further, looked in my rearview mirror, and there was nothing behind me. It was, dark and behind me. And I thought, oh, they made it. And as I proceeded forward, I happened to glance to the right, and that's when a huge fireball just filled my front windshield. And I knew that that plane had crashed. And my first thought, being in EMS and fire, is obviously 911. And I knew, having that experience, I knew that dialing, we're very rural, area, and using your cell phone to dial 911 has to hit the different repeaters. So I knew there would be a 5 to 6 minute delay. So I instantly pushed back 911 and thought of 536-7500, which is the phone number to the Snowflake PD, which I had worked with for, 11 years at this point. And I instantly pushed that back because I knew they would have to make that delay calling into Sholo. And so, these are just a moment thought. And without another thought, I reached down, picked up my phone, my flip phone, and I pressed send. And as soon as I lifted my thumb up off the send button, there was no ringtone, dial tone, nothing. It was just instantly Clay's voice there that said yes. Like I'd forgotten something. And I just said, plane crash. And he said, where? I said, Sholo Airport, north of the runway. And he says, hold on. And I could hear him getting on his radio, calling dispatch. And at that point, I realized I was still sitting in the middle of the road. So I pulled off to the side of the road. And my instinct was to get out and run and go help.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew there could not be any survivors with that explosion, that big fireball that I saw. And I knew I needed to sit there and wait for, guide the emergency workers in to the spot where we were at. And so I sat there and waited for Clay to come back on. And here he came, lights and siren.
So kind of continuing the story with that. So that was, as Deb mentioned, we worked a 48-hour shift. So that morning was the start of my day 2. And so Sholo had 3 working fire stations, and there were about 15 or 16 folks on duty every day. And my job was a battalion chief, which is just a fancy word for a supervisor. And I drove a SUV. It was a command vehicle. And so as soon as she told me, and I put that out over the radio to the alarm room, the other 3 fire stations all heard the radio traffic. And so they were up that morning doing their normal PT and exercise that they do. So they all started en route as well. For me, a normal thing to do is I'll typically say kind of a silent prayer, right? That says, Heavenly Father, please help us be able to help those that are in need of help, protect my crew, may the best outcome. And I remember saying that. And I also remember there was an inversion that came in, a fog embankment, and we're at 6,500 feet here, so our elevation is quite high. It's in February, so it's cold, and there were a lot of ice crystals that morning and heavy ice on the windows. And I remember the emergency lights glistening right off the ice crystals in the air. And it's crazy, these little things that you can remember. Anyway, and then as I pulled off on a 77, this plane crash, so we call it a 2-track road. It's out in the middle of it. Looks very similar to prairie. A lot of cattle and things out there. A lot of, we call them cedar trees. They're juniper tree. Anyway, and a lot of malachite rock. And so I remember getting through the gate and kind of bouncing along this little 2-track road. And all I can see is a small flame initially. And again, because the inversion that had pretty much covered the fog bank that it came up, pretty much hid the fire. And I was about a quarter of a mile off the road, and I come around a bend, and there was just big opening, and you could see where the plane had hit, and for lack of a better word, it cartwheeled. It bounced, and there was fire for probably 75 yards where it had hit, started some grass on fire, bounced along, and it came to rest in a clump of trees. And I'm kind of scanning this, looking for any kind of a survivor, trying to figure out how big of a plane it is and if there's any survivors. And there's barbed wire scattered, and the closest I can get is about 100 feet because of a little kind of a dry creek or ravine that wouldn't allow me to get any closer. And as I drove up, I remember there was a body laying on the ground waving, and then the plane is rested in these cedar trees, just fire all around. And I remember telling alarm that we had at least one surviving soul, and I would be mobile. So when I jumped out, I had a radio in my hand, and I had just my duty uniform. I didn't put any of my protective gear on, and I ran to the person laying on the ground, who ended up being Kelly. And mind you, I wasn't looking to see who it is. I was looking to see what it is. And I remember talking to her, and I remember blonde hair, hoop, gold earrings, and red lipstick. And as I'm asking her how many people were on the plane and if there's any other survivors, and I can hear somebody screaming from the plane that they were burning to get him out, and she's telling me to get him out, and she's about 40 feet away from the plane, fire around her, but she was in a relatively safe place, and I remember trying to figure out how she ended up there, right? Did she fall out as the plane tumbled? Was she able to get out and walk? And so as I got on the radio and basically told the crew, hey, come and get the survivor, need to get her in a safe position, and I went to the plane. And so these guys are all coming in behind me, but they're in big highway engines, so trying to get through the Malafai rock and the trees was delayed for them. And as I went to the plane, there was a door, and again, I don't know it's Robb at this time, but this guy's screaming, get me out, I'm burning, and that the cabin is clear full of smoke, the plane is on fire, there's explosions that are taking, minor explosions, not huge, but a bunch of explosions that are taking place. And I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty terrifying trying to work in that without a hose line and without protective gear. And so I'm fighting this door. Neither one of us can breathe, and the amount of heat that was coming out of there. And I reached in with my pocket knife and cut his shoulder strap, and I could not get him loose from the seat belt. Now, when the plane had crashed, it's all discombobulated, kind of like stepping on an aluminum can.
Right.
And so the seats are where they are supposed to be. I can't find the release to release him, and I can't cut his lap belt. It was a Kevlar material, come to find out, but it would not cut, so I could not get him out. And I've got an engine that's on scene. They're stretching a line. There's a captain that's pulling the line, and he's trying to get to the plane. But again, it's down a ravine,
right,
across the prairie, so to speak. And I called one of the engineers on the radio, and I said, hey, I need an extinguisher. And so I remember telling this guy, I'll be right back. And right, he's like, don't leave. I'm burning. And you got to imagine the screams that he was putting out. That was pretty rough. And so I got the extinguisher. I came back, and I had passed one of my captains that had the line. He had all his gear on. And I said, hey, Franny, see if you can get this guy out. And so he's got his breathing apparatus out or on. And right, he didn't have any luck either. So when I got back, if you think of the movies, the latch fish scream when these guys are just at the end of their life, that's what was coming out of the plane. And I took the extinguisher, knocked the fire down, and pushed it back. But now I filled the cab full of extinguisher dust. And I don't know if you've ever seen what that looks like, but it's kind of like taking flour and just throwing it in the air, and you just can't see and you can't breathe. And so we're wrestling, but we're a little bit safer now because we've knocked the fire down. I started getting people on scene, and so I kind of slid back into more of a command presence and let my crew, who were in their gear, start to rescue. And so we had made the decision for him to, we put a seat collar on his neck, and now we're being preventative. We don't want to make it worse. And he looks terrible. I mean, he had blood all over his face. He was unrecognizable. He had as they slid him out, I remember grabbing his leg. His tip fib on his left leg was broke. It was a compound fracture, so the bones are sticking out both sides of his leg, about the size of a grapefruit hole. And we slid him back, and we tried to call for a helicopter for both of them, but because of the fog inversion, we couldn't fly them, so we had to ground them to the hospital, which is about 4 miles away. We pulled him back to a safe zone, and the paramedics are working on him. They're trying to start some IVs, and there was an officer that came up to me, and he says, hey, Clay, well, do you know who that is? And I says, no, but let me see if I can find out. So I got up in the middle and I says, hey, who are you? And it's pretty obvious he had a concussion because he kept saying, he says, "I'm Rob Hatch. Where's my wife Kelly and where's my mom and dad?" And so he told me who he was, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't recognize you. I didn't recognize Kelly." And his mom and dad were deceased because I had done that. We'd call it a 360. So I had circled the plane trying to see if we had any of their survivors, and they were both deceased. And so I came back and I says, "Hey, that's Rob Hatch, and his wife Kelly's at the hospital, and his mom and dad are deceased." And I just remember that empty pit in my stomach. I mean, it was already a bad situation, but now once you put that personal relationship, who you know, it just compounds the emotion to that. And so this guy said, anyway, he says to me, he says, "Hey, has he had a priesthood blessing?" And I looked at him and I said, "Dude, he hasn't had any kind of a church blessing at all, because I'm just lucky to get him out of the plane." And I remember being a little frustrated with that, because we believe in the power of God, and we believe in healing hands and things like that. And so that for us, that's one of those things that's kind of the norm for us. It just wasn't, right? We just didn't know.
Right.
We just didn't have the time. And so we loaded him up and we shipped him to Summit, to the hospital as well. And I can remember calling the alarm room. I called her on the phone and I just says, "Hey, Mitch, we just sent the second survivor to the hospital. It doesn't look good." And I says, there's two that are deceased. And I said, "We probably need to contact the NTSB and get those things in protocol." And she says, "Clay," she says, "how did you know about this?" And I said, "Well, my wife was heading home from work and she saw the plane go down." She says, "We didn't get the first 911 notification until 45 minutes after you called in." And I can tell you that Rob and Kelly didn't have 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Right? Kelly would have died from exposure and probably cold, because it was cold, and Rob would have asphyxiated before he got burned to death. And so between those two, when you look at Tender Mercies and the importance of Debbie listening to the promptings to stop and see me, and how vital that was to their survival, it's pretty impressive how our Heavenly Father works. And it's interesting, because when I was talking to Kelly, I remember seeing a cowboy boot right next to her. And I wondered, why is this boot here? Well, the other thing that's interesting about this is typically I carry a Leatherman pocket knife. I don't know if you know what those are, but anyway, it's kind of a multi-tool, and it has a serrated blade in it. And 9 out of 10 times when I use that multi-tool, the serrated blade's the one that comes out. A serrated blade would have cut that Kevlar. Well, I forgot it that shift. And so I had this little cheap pocket knife that I kept as a backup. And had I cut that lap belt and pulled him out, I'd have either paralyzed him or killed him because of his neck injuries. There was no doubt.
Wow.
And so, again, as a tender mercy, it was better for him to endure the pain of burning than of what I would have done.
Wow. Debbie, if I could rewind, are you on scene at this point?
No, I was actually sitting on the side of the road still. I never went on scene. I stayed on the highway to let them know which gate to go in. That it was, like Clay said, the only reason I even knew that a gate was there is his crews had been thinning the cedar trees for fire prevention. And so I happened, when he said, so after he called dispatch, he came back on the phone with me and he's like, "Where exactly are you at?" And I said, "If you have your crews go through the gate where you guys have been thinning wood, you're going to be right there, thinning those trees." And so I stayed because I honestly didn't think there was anything I could have done, because I didn't feel that there would be survivors. I felt like my role was more of making sure, guiding them in to make sure they found the right spot. Because like Clay said, at this time, the inversion had come down and I couldn't see the flames from the side of the road anymore.
Debbie, if I can ask you, because if I go back, you leave work, you're on your way, and you hear a voice 3 times or prompting. What was the thing that made you stop? Do you remember? Can you remember, like, was it the repetition of the prompting, or was there just something that just said, you got to go, and you almost like involuntarily start going?
I think what the difference was, the voice before was just stop and see Clay, like a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept pushing it back because that was not my routine. And I was extremely frustrated because I kept hearing it. And I was like, I don't understand this. This is not what I do. And it was finally a stop and see Clay. So it was more of a almost like a demand type voice, more firm, I guess I should say. It was firm. Just that stop and Clay. And I didn't hesitate. Just turned left and moved forward with that. I guess I could say I finally heard it. I wasn't so stubborn. Finally heard it.
I've always wondered the same thing. Why wouldn't she want to stop and see me? I'm a little bit.
Come on, you got 5. Was it 5 times? You gotta have some convincing, huh?
She didn't listen to me either. So.
No, it's those. It makes me think of the important times in our lives when we start to feel those. You hear those promptings, and for me personally, it usually takes like a lightning bolt, something that's just like a, because I'm pretty stubborn with my routine and the way things go.
Exactly. Well, that's how you start right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and so Clay, maybe if we go back to, I'm curious about when you're approaching, you stop by you're able to get through some of the off-road terrain, and you come to kind of a spot, a ravine, and you have to get out. And you're looking at a ball of fire. At this point, do you see Kelly at this point, or is it a few steps, or because you're about 100 feet away? Is that right?
Yeah. So it's kind of a panoramic view, because again, you've got some prairie that's burning, that's putting off some light. You've got the plane that's rested in the tree that's putting off light. And so she's laying on the ground, and I just see the arm waving. And I think it's because of where she ended up in front of the plane with the plane behind her that gave her some visibility. Where had she been behind the plane, I wouldn't have seen her until I did a 360.
So if you didn't see her, would that have changed what you did, or how you surveyed the area?
I would have probably done everything the same, except I would have taken a white 360, right? I would have done a full circle around it, trying to assess on all sides to see what we had to give an on-scene report back to the crew, so they could picture what I was seeing. So instead, seeing her, I just immediately went to her.
And at what point do you hear Robb?
It was pretty immediate. Like as soon as I started to talk to Kelly, I could hear him.
So you get to Kelly and you hear Robb, and so there's at least 2.
That's correct.
Kelly, if we could go back to you real quick, because I know we need to cover how you got there. Do you recall seeing Clay? Do you remember when he came to you and what he said?
I honestly think once I saw lights, I think I knew help was there. And honestly, I think I just sunk into relief, like help is here. And I don't remember. I have a few memories of maybe being in the ER in the emergency room before we were flown to the burn unit in Phoenix, and just glimpses of faces and things. And I honestly don't remember what, like my mom says, I was speaking for weeks. I every day it was kind of like 51st dates where they would come in and tell you what was going on. Or, same questions. Robb, what happened? They'd have to tell me Robb's parents passed again every day. So 2 weeks after the accident, it was like I woke up one day and it was all there. That's when I really remember the details. And part of me thought, am I crazy? Did this happen? Did I, is this real? And my mom shared that, from the minute we got to you, your story never changed.
Yeah.
That, you told us when you got out, you heard the voice, the someone was holding you, and that you woke up, and that was a relief to me, because when you're so medicated and you've got a traumatic brain injury, and you're burned and broken bones and so much recovery and pain, you're not sure if it's from the medication or you're having
Yeah.
hallucinations. And it's what I know happened, and there's no explanation. We talked about it together, other than with my maybe mom or the few people that were allowed to come see us, that were close. Obviously, it was like, who was it? And it just, you knew that you had help from beyond the veil, like, there was, angels are real. And we've heard stories like that, in pioneer faith, or different stories from history, and you never imagine having an experience like that for yourself, and so we talked a lot about, we lost a child, I lost my father, or was it grandpa, like, who could it have been? I don't remember the sound of the voice saying, like, oh, that was his voice. It was just, I just remember the voice and the words. And so we talked about it together privately. And about 2 months after the accident, a friend of ours called one day, and they wanted to check on us. We were in a rehabilitation hospital at that point, and doing a little better. And they finally were able to reach us and, see how we're doing and what we could remember. And we rehearsed what we knew. And I think I honestly kind of kept out some of the details of the voice and what happened, because you still think, people will think you're crazy. And this was like kind of a sacred experience.
Yeah.
And we shared what we remembered. We said goodbye. And the following day, our friend Betty, they called back, and her husband Jeremy said, Robb, I know this will sound crazy, but Betty has something to share with you. She knows how Kelly got out of that plane. And we kind of joked about it, like, oh, was she hiding behind the cedar tree? Just, like, okay. They said after our conversation, they were thinking about it, talking about things, and they'd gone to bed that night. And in the middle of the night, Betty woke up and grabbed her husband, just in tears, and she was just soaked in sweat. And she said, Jeremy, I've had a vision. I've had a dream like nothing I've ever experienced. She said, I could smell the smoke and feel the cold, and I watched as this airplane came tumbling out of the sky and ripped across the field and exploded. And she said, I could see, Robb and Kelly just struggling and screaming. And she said, I realized his parents had both passed, and I could hear just the prayer, the screaming of prayer and help, and Heavenly Father, please help us. And as this goes on, she said that she watched Robb's dad. He rose from his physical form. She could see his spirit, and he came to my side, and then she told us the same words. He put his arms around you, and he said, be calm, I am here, I will get you out. And he just lifted me from that fire and laid me down in the field, and he was gone. And that cowboy boot that they found laying there with me in the field was Robb's dad's cowboy boot.
Oh my goodness.
But, they were not ejected. They both broke their necks and died on impact on the crash. And as she shared that with us, it was the most real and, spiritually reaffirming moment that was true, that's who my angel was, and that the moment his life ended, his work began on the other side. And we were parted that mercy for him to, for whatever reason, for us to be spared. The Lord allowed him to rescue me that day.
Wow. That's incredible. Clay, when you get to Kelly, do you wonder how she got there? Are you kind of like, how did she get here? Do you think she was ejected, or what were your thoughts when you saw her?
Well, at that point, that wasn't, it was right real quick, like, I wonder how she got here. But then I moved on. But later,
Mm-hmm.
standing out there with the NTSB, with the police department, that they started the investigation, and we had a lengthy conversation over that, over
Hmm.
how did one person out of the four of them end up where she ended up, because Rob's parents, their seats were broken loose, but they were right next to the plane, right? Almost like they had just kind of turned out a little bit, so they were right next to the plane. Robb was still in the plane, obviously, but Kelly's seat was in the plane, so it's not like her seat came out. She literally was laying on the ground.
Right.
And so our original, as we talked about this, was the assumption was as the plane bounced along, she may have fell out, because looking at the plane, we could not figure out how she would have climbed out of it.
Right.
And then you didn't see drag marks, you didn't see footprints or anything that would give you an indication that she had crawled to safety or walked to safety.
But then a couple more little facts that we talked about later, and we dissected this just like you're dissecting it in your mind 500,000 times, trying to figure out how everything went. And she broke her left hand, and so of course they wrapped it and took care of that. Well, when they took the cast off, which is obviously a month or so later, there's this big old scab on her left hand. Well, it was nylon, and it was melted nylon. Well, how do you get melted nylon on you if you get ejected? Because the fire didn't start until after impact.
Right.
But yet she's got this nylon from and the only thing that's nylon in there is your seatbelt. So like she said, she was screaming and jerking, trying to get the seatbelt off, slapping at the flames and everything. How does all that happen? How do you get third-degree burns on your right leg, almost down to the bone, if you were ejected? And she broke her femur. So there's all these things that they want to point immediately to ejection, and that's what happened. And actually, that is actually what they told us happened. Well, we obviously have a contradicting story, and they don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear that there's angels among us. They don't want to hear that miracles still happen on this earth today.
Yeah.
They don't want to hear that people hear and can help and be tools in our Heavenly Father's hand.
Yeah.
So a lot of this that we go through is definitely special. It's definitely happened to us, and we know what happened. And there's so many things that happen. For example, the boot. We tell this story over and over, but we didn't put all of these things together until months and months later. We didn't hear about the boot until we went and visited the crash site, probably 4 months after the accident. We went back, and my brother actually took Kelly and I, and we were talking about kind of where everything was, because all my siblings, I've got 6 siblings and then me, so there's 7 of us. And he started going over all the layout and kind of where Kelly was, and he says, yeah, and Dad's cowboy boot was right there. And we're like, what? Because at that time, we hadn't shared all of the things that we just shared with you, and we compounded this story in a matter of 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, we hadn't shared this with the world. So all of these little pieces and all of these little validations and tender mercies are coming to fruition to help the story move along. And it just went along and along and along. And so, and just like you, people are interested in hearing it.
Yeah.
And again, we've got hours of conversation and little things just like what we're talking about. We're just hitting the highlights.
I mean, this deserves like a thorough dissection. I think it's pretty incredible. Just in the few minutes you shared with me, the things that all have to work together to make this happen. And I don't believe in coincidences and so there's something else at work and making these things all come together for sure.
Another point on that, it's like, well, why would Kelly be pulled out of the plane, but Robb was left. But as
Mhm.
you're saying, all these pieces are being put into place. The rescue's coming at the year mark. The flight and aviation, they store a crashed airplane in a warehouse for a year, and at that point so that they can do their investigation, and at that point they're going to get rid of it for space. And they called the family and they asked if we wanted to see the airplane. We were still pretty traumatic and tender, and Robb didn't really want to visit that yet. And so his younger brother went to the warehouse. He said, I just need to see it. So GR went, and when he came back, he said, there's no doubt why Dad had to pull you from that plane when he did. He said, Kelly, your seat was completely burned. It was gone.
Wow.
And on this side of the plane was on fire. Robb was hot and burning, but he wasn't on fire, so he had time. I didn't have time. I mean, like I said, I was already actively on fire, burning, slapping. My whole right leg was completely burned. And but there's just these little things that confirm, the experience that we had.
So we're here. It's 2012, and we're, what is it? Years later, and if you can remember, I mean, I imagine, Robb, for you, this is, I mean, you've lost your parents, and in the aftermath, I mean, I can only imagine. How long is it before you start to, I think you mentioned a couple of months, but before you start to really recover and start to really see God's hand in everything? Was it immediate? Did it take time? What was that like for you?
For me, I went into that mode of I'm the dad, the husband, the spouse, the son, and I only cared about one thing, and that was Kelly's well-being. So I never cried, I never shed a tear, I didn't do anything as far as mourning my the loss of my parents until about, I'm going to say it was October-ish, 6 months or so, and I had started back to work, and I was working about 2 or 3 hours a day, but it's just, I needed to go to work. I needed to get out of the house.
Mm-hmm.
I'm used to working 60, 70 hours a week, and then all of a sudden you're sitting there on your bed, and you have to be fed, you have to be
right,
clothed, you have to be bathed. I mean, we had to do everything. You had to learn to walk again. All of those things. So to answer your question of when did I really realize everything, it was probably about 6 months, and I just broke in half. I think it was a couple of days that I just sat there and sobbed, and I was just so grateful for what we did have, and yet I was so hurt and sorrowful of what we lost.
I mean, it's a massive loss. I can only imagine. And at that point, is that where you feel like you started to heal?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as far as healing goes, we had a major surgery of one kind or another. Either Kelly or I, we kind of alternated about every 6 months for the next 3 years or so, just because we wanted to be able to. Our kids at the time were 9 and 12 in 2012. And so as the years go, I mean, they were pretty active, and we wanted to be there. And so Kelly would go have something, and then I'd go and have something, and then we'd heal up and kind of go back and forth, back as far as that goes. But lots of physical therapy, and lots of just time, and then the four of us, of course, everybody immediately wanted to hear the story and know how this happened and what happened and all of the details. So we started giving firesides, and it was just Kelly and I. And the first time that we gave one, they got this big old cushy recliner chair for me and one for Kelly, and they brought us a mic, and we told the best that we could on our story. And I just pretty much cried for about 30 minutes, and Kelly told some of the story. And as time went along, we invited Clay and Debbie to come with us because of their part in this story is so vital
Yeah.
of being our first responders and our heroes. So we've become really, really, really good friends. And to date, we've probably given the fireside over 100 times, and we've been
Wow.
all over the western U.S., Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Montana, and we've been as far back east as Georgia. And so it's definitely, it goes to show that there are people out there just like what you're doing that love and want and need good news and need a great story and a positive story.
Yeah, I mean, even in the midst of the tragedy that it is, I think as human beings, we all want to hope that there's good things like this that can happen, that do happen, that still happen, and I think that connects us. It's that can happen to us. Like, heaven forbid, something like that
Absolutely
has to happen to us, or that we have to go through something like that. But there's that connection. I think that
I feel like we're the same as everybody else. We always think that we've heard about stories or it's going to happen to somebody else, but this time it didn't. It happened to us, and we're just here to share what did happen, regardless of what some people think or what some people say.
Mm-hmm.
I heard a great quote yesterday that I love, and it's I'll probably hammer it, but I'm going to try. And it's, those with an opinion have no bearing on those with an actual experience.
Yeah.
Because we've had some folks that have said that this couldn't have happened. That's not what happened. It was something else. We're here to say that it did happen.
During our recovery, our families were told, if we survive, we'll probably be paralyzed. Even if we're not paralyzed with our traumatic brain injuries, we would never live independently again. And so that's pretty grim news for our family and for us to think, how are we going to take care of our children and raise our kids and work and, go back to life? And there's a lot more to the story. As the weeks go by, our recovery was just incredible. Doctors couldn't explain why we were doing so well, at the rate we were doing so well. They told us, it'd probably be 6 to 9 months in the hospital. We wouldn't be home for a year. And we returned back to Snowflake at right about 100 days, just over 3 months, bypassing all of their expectations with no explanation. One day a nurse came to the room and said, now, tell me about your faith, or that law of health, or whatever it is you guys believe in. And I was like, I was so medicated, the law of health, and we understand that to be the word of wisdom revealed through prophets and apostles. And I explained to her that belief and how we try to live and how we try to live in obedience to that. And she said there is a significant difference in the population of patients that come into the hospital setting. She said people of faith, and especially your faith, do so much better. You recover, you have hope, and you live through things that most people don't. She said, I wish I could bottle that up and share it with everyone, that all of our patients, everyone that comes in. And I'm just kind of, just thinking, somebody call the missionaries. It's ready. But so often during that time, to hear the doctors say, that is the hand of God, or there must be a higher power. We can't explain why your scan says this and how you're walking, or
right.
That type of thing. And why this has happened to us, we have no idea, but we know without a doubt that it did, and it's true. And just every day is a gift. We're so grateful for this opportunity and to share his love and that he is aware of each and every one of us, and there's a purpose for our lives.
Well, I think your willingness to share, I know why. I mean, there's probably thousands of people that have been influenced by your story and are yet to be influenced. It sounds like you're writing a book. Is that right?
We're in the process. It's been slow, but
It's worth
hard
it.
to get it all in there. Get it right.
You absolutely should. And we'll share this as wide and far as we can. Just because people need to know that these things still happen. We encounter every day with all of the darkness and terrible things that happen. There's just even greater things happening, incredible things happening. And it's usually these types of experiences that people hear and they're like, nah. But then you start to put it together and they're like, well, what else could it be? And that's where people start to get curious and I start asking questions. And I think that's important. But it's such an inspiring and uplifting story. I feel like we've just scratched the surface, and there's so much. I mean, it's been years. I did want to ask you, Rob and Kelly, you've faced something. I mean, we have a lot of people in our audience, and just through what we do with the flower letters is people reach out to us and share their stories. And a lot of times people are going through just really difficult things, and they found some solace in a fictional story that we've shared with them that brings them hope and through the experience that we offer. For our listeners who are going through something challenging, something traumatic, whether it's grand or small, if there were 3 pieces of advice that you would give to somebody that's going through something really difficult, what would those 3 things be that to kind of help them through their day to day?
I'll start because this is actually one of the things that we talk about when we're sharing this, and it's our attitude. It's not always easy, and it's actually oftentimes more difficult than easy. But I really wish I'd have brought my paper so I don't hammer this quote. But it's to the extent of 90% 90% of what happens to us we can control, and 10% is out of our. It's not even close to it. Anyway, I'll look it up, but the bottom line is we get to decide how we accept what happens. Bad things are going to happen. That's a fact. We all know that. Whether it's a loved one that passes, whether it's an illness, whether it's an accident, whether it's bad grades in school, whether it's a boyfriend or girlfriend that broke up with us, whatever it may be, it is going to happen. How we accept that and what we allow that item or thing or situation to influence us is our choice. We get to choose whether we're okay with that. And it's super easy to say, much more difficult to do, but there's always a positive. There's always something that is better that is coming. For example, when I was left in the plane and Clay brought the wrong knife, we'd actually talked about that numerous times, and we were trying to decide why he couldn't get me out. And it finally dawned on us, if he would have got me out, he would have done a rapid extrication, thrown me over his shoulder, and my neck would have popped. My neck was already broke, so that would have meant one of 2 things, death or paralysis, guaranteed, and more likely death. So sometimes we have to go through difficult things to get to better things. So again, your attitude and how you receive things and what you choose and how you choose to receive them and deal with them is our choice. That's the beauty of free agency. We get to decide.
I think what I would add is, 2 things is that impossible isn't impossible to God. And obviously there were days it was dark and there was just no end in sight. And here we are today. He knows all, and his plan for us is so far greater and beautiful than we can ever imagine for ourselves. So when we get in a hard spot, if we can just give it to him, and allow him to do his work, because he wants to be in our lives. He's part of our lives, whether we accept him or not, but he's there when we allow him into our lives and we accept it. We can see his footprints, beside us through the whole thing. The other thing I would say, one of a quote that we use in our fireside is that we are each of us angels with only one wing and can fly only by embracing one another. And there's no doubt that we got through what we did because of help and prayers in our community, family members, neighbors, that took care of our kids, that took care of Robb's business. His brother kept that running while we were gone. There was nothing in our life that wasn't touched and handled. When we came back, over 3 months later, we just walked right back into as though we'd never left because others made it possible. So don't be afraid to ask for help and accept help. That's often hard to do. Obviously, when your situation is plastered all over the news and everybody knows about it, help comes running easily. But there's times when nobody knows what you are going through, and it's okay. We all have hard times. Let them know. Let them know you need a prayer, you need a friend, someone to sit with you, and be that person that smiles and asks and is interested in others, and you want to help and give. That's the only way we got through it, was because on the hardest of days you felt the power of their prayers and the reaffirming words of encouragement that gave you the will to get through one more second, one more hour, one more day when it was the hardest. And I think that's what I'd say.
Debbie and Clay, if there were lessons you've extracted, obviously you play a central role in this whole story. It's pretty incredible. Clay, from what you do, you encounter these things. Trauma, it's part of what you do, and you've been doing it for 33 years. And you mentioned when it became someone you knew, how did that change the way you approach things? Did it change any way that you approach things, or how you acted in that instance, or what at that point does it change your perspective on things, or you just you keep going, you follow your training?
No, that's an interesting question. So here's what I found out after this plane wreck. So we do what's called an after action review. We'll talk about the incidents. We'll talk about how it went, trying to learn how we can be better, right, for the next incident we roll on. And for years, I've been doing this for a long time, and I still do this today. I found is typically I don't look at people in the eyes when I'm on an incident like this, like trauma. I've been on car wrecks where there's been, a patient's been ejected, they're laid in the middle of the street, we treat them, we transport. It's not till they've been transported that we're talking about this. I say, did you recognize that was so and so? I was like, no, I didn't. And I said, well, you treated him. And I said, you're right, but I didn't put that together. And so I think for me, a defense mechanism on some of these more traumatic events is that I don't look in the middle of their face and their eyes to see who they are. I'm trying to treat the incident and trying to treat the patient versus the person, because if you make it personal, right, the room for additional adrenaline, the room for error, trauma, burnout, all those things will start to come. So you kind of have to treat each one as just another incident to be able to manage, right, the ugly stuff that we see. People don't call us on their good days, right? We get called on their bad days.
That's not true. I call you all the time.
And more importantly with this is Deb and I were just two people in the car. There's a lot of people that blessed Robb and Kelly's life. And, I share this in the fireside. We share this. Is I don't know why they're here today, but it's for the greater good that God has in store for them. It's not because of what Deb and I did or didn't do. It's because of the intervention and the tender mercies that our Heavenly Father has for them and for the lives that Robb and Kelly are supposed to bless.
Yeah. Well, you're all for a walking testament of God's hand. It's pretty incredible to hear this. I know we've just got a couple of minutes. I did want to ask you, obviously this is such a challenging, I shouldn't call it challenging, it's traumatic. It's terrible. It's awful. Lately I've been thinking about something about, people who are in dark places and facing difficult things. Was there a point in your healing or in your progress where you had to decide that it was okay that it was awful, and that you're maybe having an awful day, or that it was an absolutely awful thing that happened? Because I've talked to a lot of people that, haven't been able to heal from difficult and traumatic things until they realized and recognized, yeah, this was terrible. This is really difficult. There's a lot of silver linings and there's a lot of light coming in, but this was something that was really difficult, and really recognizing it for what it actually is. Maybe I'm not framing that correctly, but I'm just curious if that was ever something that you've considered or thought about, and if that was part of your, or is part of your process of healing.
It was like I told you. It was whenever, I don't know the exact date. I didn't write it down or anything. But when I finally broke down and realized all the things, just like what you're saying, I think it finally hit me because of all of the positives, just like what you're saying, and because we'd got past, we'd made it, so to speak. I knew we weren't out of the woods, but I knew we were going to get out of the woods. I knew we were going to make it. For me, it was then, but there was lots of days. You know, I mean, we learned how to walk again. We learned how to do everything again that goes with that, or with the injuries that we had. So when you talk about the dark days, and we understand that, we've been there. It was that way for a long time. And I think one of the things that got me through it, at least, was just the fact that I love my wife so much. I always tell this one story real quick and then I'll let her do it. But they wouldn't put us in the same hospital rooms because of our injuries. And a lot of them were burns and all these things, but they were scared of infection and that sort of thing. Well, obviously I love my wife. She was across the hall from us. And my brother knew that I was whining about that every time he come to see me. So he unhooked the bed, because they were on rollers, and turned my bed sideways in the room. So I'm looking right out the door. Well, I can see the bottom of my wife's bed. So he walks across the hall and turns her bed so that now we can look at each other. Well, we're both in halos at the time. And I immediately, it gave me a new lease on life, so to speak, because I didn't care about anything except trying to help her, even though I couldn't help her and I couldn't even go over there, but I could watch it, right? And so we had a room phone that was the old style that, you know, has the handset and then the digital or the rotary or whatever. So I'd pick it up and I'd call her and I could talk to her, and then I had to put the phone up to my ear because there was a bar right here, halo. And I talked to her. Finally, you know, she'd move and I'd call her. I'd say, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "Nothing, just relax, leave me alone." So then a buddy of mine, because we're big hunters, came in and he saw me doing that one day. So the next day he brought me some walkie-talkies. So Kelly had the walkie-talkie and I had a walkie-talkie. So now, I mean, I'm just glued. I mean, eagle-eyed on her, watching everything. So every time she moved, I was like, "What are you doing? You okay?" She's like, "Yes, I'm okay." Well, it was all well and good until she got so tired of me saying that, she shut the door. So then I don't even get to see her no more. So don't ever shut the door, okay? Leave the door open.
He makes that sound funny. I shut the door because I was having mood change and dressing changes, and it's pretty painful and hard to watch at night. I didn't want him to watch that stuff. But anyways, being able to just see each other and talk and you know, in the really dark, hard days, there were definitely times, and that's another story, that I had to choose to stay, because when you're that broken and burned and beat up, you think, what kind of a mom can I be, or wife, or what value will my life have if I can't do the things I've always done? And so it's definitely a choice. You know, you have to choose, like I said, and sometimes you choose to make it one more second till the next minute. This may sound absolutely so silly, but one day in my hospital room, I mean, you can't go to the bathroom, you can't, you know, people are taking care of every bodily need and function. You're never left alone. You almost feel like a prisoner, and it's just rough. And I sat there and thought, there's nothing I can do to make this situation better other than, you know, my brother had brought me an iPad, so I would put on music, instrumental music, or conference talks, or just having control of something like that. One day I looked at my mom, and my head is shaved. I had rods and screws put in my neck, and I don't even look like myself. We haven't showered. With a halo and a body vest, you don't shower for 90 days. You stink. Everything is just so down, just rough. And so I looked at my mom and I said, I need my toothbrush, because I had one good hand. I need my toothbrush and I need makeup. And she almost laughed. Like, you want makeup? It's not going to do any good, honey. You smell like a great piece of bacon. And I'm like, I know. But I just started with, I could brush my teeth, and I could, put a little mester on. As pointless as it was, it made me feel good enough to make it to the next to the next day or whatever, and the lights would go down at night. You're so beat up you think you're just gonna pass out and sleep, but sleep never comes. The pain is so intense, and you just pray. You just talk to God all night, and carries you one more night till the next day. At one point, in that darkness, I was sedated for days on end between surgeries in the beginning, and my mind and spirit was very alert, very awake, but it felt like I was buried alive in just this darkness. Your body won't respond. You can't sit up, you can't wake up, but you are in there. And I thought, I had those thoughts, those dark thoughts that, is this it? Did I die? And it's just blackness, and there really is nothing else. It was just complete despair. And again, just all I could think of was Lord, my Savior. And I heard him speak the scripture, peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth give I. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. And it was repeated 3 times, and that my circumstance didn't change. The lights didn't come on, the medication didn't wear off. I couldn't sit up and see where I was, but I knew I was okay. I had peace that transcends all understanding. I knew my kids were going to be okay. We were going to get through this. It was unexplainable, but peace is the presence of your Savior, Jesus Christ. It's not the absence of trials or challenges. It's what you focus on. And as Rob said earlier, it's a choice. And that's all in this, where we were and the situation we were, sometimes that's all we had was to choose him.
Yeah. Well, thank you. If there's anything I've taken away, it's angels are real. 2 of them are named Debbie and Clay.
I've never been called an angel.
Oh, first time? Well, it's true. I think I think the angels are here and there. We're angels here and there. Thank you guys so much for sharing your story. I know we just scratched the surface. We'll try to share this as wide and far as we can, and write that book. There's we need good books. We need good stories. This could be a documentary. You could get a film crew and come in and reenact it. This is what an incredible story. But thank you for sharing it with us. Thank you for being open. I hope you continue to share it and continue to find other ways.
Thanks for what you did.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we hope to just bring more light. There's more light to people's lives, and joy and goodness. And I'm sure everyone who's listening to this right now, hopefully they'll feel the light coming from you guys, and maybe it'll brighten their day a little bit. That's all we can hope for. So thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Stories Told Through You, the Flower Letters podcast.
Got a true story you'd like to share? Email us at podcast@theflowerletters.com.
If you're new here, welcome. To learn more about us, head over to theflowerletters.com.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and help us spread these inspiring true stories. Until next time.